Hi, everyone. If you are joining us, Tori, can you turn the music down just a little bit? Um, if you are joining us, feel free to drop in the chat where you are joining from. I am hailing from our nation's capital here in Washington, D.C. Okay, Kansas is in the building. Thank you, Jonathan, for being here. Iowa, okay. Thank you, Jen. New Mexico, California, Vegas. Southern California. Oh, okay. Renee, thank you for being here. Burlington, New Jersey. If there are resources, housing resources that anybody knows of in California, please share that with Renee. Mississippi, Connecticut, Chicago. I was just in Chicago for WNBA All-Star Weekend, actually. Rockford, Illinois. Some more Cali folks, Eugene, Oregon. Beverly from Philly, Bay Area. We are based in the Bay. Dream.org is in Oakland. South Carolina, Mobile, Alabama, El Paso, Texas, Orlando, Florida, Newport Beach, Cali, Bethlehem, Pennsylvania. We got folks all over the place. A lot of Cali people. Thank you for being here. And thank you to the West Coast folks holding it down this evening. Gonna give it a few more minutes. Richmond, I'm from Virginia, so shout out to Richmond. The Bronx, New York. My name is Rachel Payton. I live here in Washington, D.C. in Northeast. I am the Senior Director of Communications and Marketing here at Dream.org, and I have the pleasure of moderating tonight. And so we can go ahead and turn to the next slide. So tonight we are talking about housing rights and affordability, and more specifically, what we should be thinking about, researching, asking ourselves, and asking our candidates on our ballot boxes as we are heading into the midterm elections this fall. Some of you have already had or are having primary elections. And so you know who are going to be on the ballots for certain things, but some of us are still have some primaries to go. So we are sharing the education. We started this series talking about voting rights, particularly what's happening across the South. A few weeks ago, we had a conversation about what's at stake as it pertains to public health and public safety. And we know that stable housing is one of the key resources needed, especially for people that are transitioning back into society. Stable housing is a key resource for continued public safety and public health in our communities. So we have a first pop-up question for our attendees here, and you can drop in the chat. How are housing rights and lack of affordability showing up in your community? So it may affect people that are in the Bay in a different way that it affects people that are in the Bronx, in a different way that it affects people that are in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania. All of you that I just mentioned are represented in this chat and a bunch of other areas. And so if there's anything that you all are either working on, that you're experiencing yourself, that you've seen in your neighborhood, that you've seen in your community, if there's any examples you want to share in the chat about how it's showing up, this disparity in your communities, feel free to do that. We have Remy from Kansas. People are being forced to rent from a landlord who has a monopoly on multifamily housing, who does not maintain their properties. That's a problem. Beverly, I think this is Beverly from Philly. Many relatives living together, a lot of overcrowding. That's a good thing to flag. Apartment shortages that are affordable, making it difficult to get out of slumlord situations. Criminalizing homelessness. That's a big thing that Dream.org talks about, while not doing anything to help eliminate the barriers to affordable housing. Absolutely. Increasing homelessness, years on the wait list for housing, low supply of housing stock, Harrison lives in San Francisco, where there's a lot of homeless people suffering and in some cases slowly dying on the streets. In the city of Antioch, the city of Antioch just rejected or voted against the Project Room Key. There just aren't enough resources for the need for housing in Antioch. Renee is sharing her story. Is experiencing homelessness in Long Beach, California, based off of a diagnosis that's caused complications, which again is relating back to public health resources and also public safety resources for people that can then transition into stable housing that can help them with their health journeys. We got Jonathan, who said the homeless population increases every single year despite significant funding toward mitigation efforts in Kansas. So we need to be looking at where that funding is going. I'll read a couple more. South Carolina has housing laws that benefit the landlord more than they provide help for low-income families. I feel like that's a true sentiment in a lot of places. Criminal history makes it impossible to find housing to lease to you. We're definitely going to talk about that tonight. We don't even have an open wait list for disability where I am in South Carolina, says Eric. Winter says that in New Mexico, there's zero enforcement of law on behalf of tenants. Um, and then a couple more. Chris says a landlord who doesn't do anything about issues in their building. And then Bonita says, I no longer feel housing is affordable. Job loss, low wages, increasing economic costs make it almost impossible. There are not enough resources to meet the demand of the definition of homelessness. So thank you all for sharing that, and thank you all for those that have shared some of their personal lived experiences. Please read the comments in the chat if there's somebody that you connect with, if there's somebody that is in your area, in your state, and you may have resources or you may just want to send out some words of encouragement. Please do that. This is a panel conversation, but this is also a community, even if it is virtual. So it is for all of us to get something from all of each other. So with that said, quickly we can go to the next slide. All right, so today, like I said, we are talking about housing rights and affordability, but this is a multi-part series. And next week, actually on August 4th, we will be talking about what's at stake with AI and democracy. I'm sure that a lot of communities that are struggling with housing, that are struggling with some of these other issues, are possibly connected to some of the data center issues that are happening across the country. Maybe people are concerned about job loss due to AI and its disruption in the workforce. So we're going to dig a little bit into that. We have the AI Now Institute that will be with us. We have Ariel from Politico, who's been covering this across the states. We have Keyshawn Pearson from Memphis Community Against Pollution, who's been leading the data center charge in the Memphis and area and in the South. And then we have our very own Kashif Wizard, who manages our tech initiatives here at dream.org. So if you are interested in this conversation, feel free to scan this QR code, but we will also send it in a follow-up email after tonight's session. So you'll have that link in your inboxes as well. Next slide. Thanks, Tori. I think that's the last slide. So for today's conversation, I'm going to go ahead and get started with our panelists. First off, we have Yusuf Dahl, who is a long-term vet with the Dream Team in the Empathy Network. But more significantly, he is a housing rights advocate and social entrepreneur whose story has shaped national policy. After his own lived experience with the criminal justice system, he founded the Milwaukee Metro Management, an award-winning affordable housing company with over 200 residential and commercial units. So he took his own experience and said, absolutely not, I need to do something about this. And that's exactly what happened and what is currently happening. He earned a Master of Public Administration from Princeton, serving as founding director of the Center for Innovation and Entrepreneurship at Lafayette College. And now he leads the national campaign to repeal the Thurmond Amendment through the Fair Future Act, which we will talk about a little bit later. And his personal testimony has directly inspired the bill's introduction in Congress, and he has been able to gather bipartisan support. So excited for him to talk to you guys a little bit more about that work. We also have Kim Johnson, who is the Senior Director of Policy at the National Low Income Housing Coalition, where she leads federal policy advocacy on affordable housing and works with advocates across the country to advance housing justice. Her expertise includes housing protections under the Violence Against Women Act, and we particularly talked last time about how women are also more susceptible to be at the intersection of public health lack of public health resources and to be victims of public safety crises. So there's a lot of intersection in the conversations that we are having. But she also has expertise in criminal justice reform and eviction policy. Before joining the National Low Income Housing Coalition, Kim worked as an advocate for survivors of domestic and sexual violence and served on the Obama administration's White House task force to protect students from sexual assault. She holds graduate degrees from George Washington University and James Madison University. And last but certainly not least, we have my fellow Dream colleague, Kendia Milton, who is the Government Affairs Director here at Dream, where he strengthens the organization's presence on Capitol Hill, in state capitals, and in city halls nationwide. He brings more than 20 years of policy and government affairs experience, including serving as a senior congressional staffer and chief of staff for the city of Detroit. He brings both professional expertise and lived experience to his work, grounded in a belief that effective public policy should improve people's quality of life. And today's conversation is going to be about how effective housing public policy should and can and will improve people's quality of life. So thank you, Yusuf, Candia, Kim, for being here. If you're in the chat, feel free to give them a round of applause, send them some love. And I'm going to go ahead and dive in with my first question for Kim. So, Kim, the National Low Income Housing Coalition has been on the front lines of federal housing policy for decades. And right now, the landscape is shifting pretty quickly. While many other things are happening quickly, it feels like we're in a blurring whirlwind often. But from the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development rolling back tenant protections to the push to repeal the Thurmond Amendment through the Fair Future Act, can you talk to us and give us a picture of where things stand right now and what the most urgent threats are as we are heading into the midterms?
Thank you so
Thank you
much,
so much,
Rachel,
Rachel,
and
and
Change.org for having me. I'm Kim Johnson. I'm the Senior Policy Director at the National Low Income Housing Coalition, and it is my pleasure to be here with you all tonight. So I'm going to start off by doing a little bit of a walkthrough of the timeline for the remainder of the 119th Congress, what we're looking towards for the next couple months, and what folks can do to help weigh in with their members of Congress in order to shape how these policies take place. So first, Congress is currently in what is known as August recess, and that is when members of Congress leave their district or leave their offices on Capitol Hill to go back to their home states and district. It's a great opportunity to catch them at home, right? It's a great opportunity to have conversations with folks, with your elected officials when they are actually in district, when you can show them the impact of investments in affordable housing or lack of affordable housing, and the impact that their decisions in DC are having on their constituents. So August recess goes until around Labor Day, after Labor Day week. Congress will be back in session for most of September and then out again in October for campaigning. Then, of course, we have elections on November 4th. And then Congress returns for what is known as a lame duck, which is not an expression that I love, but it's known as a lame duck session on November 9th until they adjourn in December. So December 17th, 18th, right around the holidays. So in total, we're really just looking at only 10 working weeks before the end of this 119th Congress. So that's 10 weeks for Congress to get some stuff done, hopefully. And we'll dive into what we're paying attention to over the next couple months. So first, folks may have heard there was a big bipartisan housing bill that was enacted into law, the 21st Century Road to Housing Act. It's the first bipartisan housing bill in over a decade, and it makes needed changes to HUD programs to help streamline them and to reduce administrative burdens. to help people better access programs. But I think it's very important to point out that this bill, while important, does not provide the needed investments to really address the affordable housing crisis at its roots, right? It's not providing additional funding for the development, maintenance, and operation of affordable housing, of accessible housing. It's not providing additional funding for things like vouchers that we know help make rent more affordable for people. Right now. And so one thing that I want to flag for people that's going to be on the ballot is the implementation of this law. We want to make sure that this law is implemented in an equitable way, that the administration and HUD are held accountable to make sure that funding and resources are going where they are supposed to, and that communities are not left out of the opportunities that this bill will present. Equally as important, and something else that is on the ballot, is getting funding for the implementation of those very important programs like project-based rental assistance, like tenant-based rental assistance, like public housing repairs and operations that we know will really make a difference in the lives of people with low incomes. So the 21st Century Road to Housing Act, when I'm not jib-jabbering, I will drop a link to our analysis of that bill. And NLIHC, if you haven't heard of us, we're a national advocacy organization, and our advocacy is focused specifically on addressing the housing needs of people with the lowest incomes and folks experiencing homelessness. So our analysis of this bill really focuses first on the provisions that are most going to impact low-income households. So the 21st Century Road to Housing Act, again, great first step, one silver lining in what has been kind of a pretty bad federal landscape for housing. And another silver lining is also the Fair Futures Act, which my wonderful colleague Yusuf Dahl is going to be talking about later. So I'm going to save that for him. And I'm going to keep talking about some of the things we're looking at for the rest of the year for housing. Another piece of the affordable housing puzzle landscape, I guess, that we're looking at is appropriations. And appropriations is the yearly process the federal government goes through to fund federal programs and services. So we do this every year. In theory, they are supposed to be done with all of their appropriations work. They have 12 bills that they put together. They're supposed to be done, Congress is, with appropriations by October 1st of every year. That has not happened since, I think, 1994. So generally, Congress gets by passing something called a continuing resolution, which just maintains funding for an extended period of time to essentially draw out that deadline and give Congress more time to enact those new spending bills for the year. So as is as is process now, Congress is once again behind on its homework, and so it is likely that we are going to look at a continuing resolution that carries funding through until December. So after the elections, in order to again just extend that deadline and keep funding for federal programs going. So another thing we're paying attention to is one, that continuing resolution, and two, that final spending bill for HUD programs that we are still waiting on. It is crucial that we see increased funding for HUD rental assistance and homelessness assistance programs every year in order to just maintain the services being offered to people currently. And that it's important to note too that funding for these programs is so scarce. These programs are so underfunded that only 1 in 4 households eligible to receive rental assistance actually gets it. So the other 75% of otherwise eligible households continue to struggle to make ends meet, even though there is a program that is simply underfunded that they cannot access that would help them out. And so something else that is on the ballot for, the future, getting additional funding for those vital programs, ideally to expand it so that everybody who is eligible to receive assistance gets it, so that nobody is struggling to make ends meet and everyone has a safe, affordable, accessible place to call home. One of the other pieces I wanted to flag as well is implementation of HR 1, also known as the One Big Beautiful Bill or One Big Ugly Bill, depending on who you are talking to. I just call it HR 1. This was the bill that Republicans enacted last year through a process called reconciliation, which allows a bill to passed through the Senate with a simple majority of 51 votes instead of the two-thirds majority usually required of 60 votes. So reconciliation essentially allows a bill to pass through Congress without any bipartisan support if there's one party that controls all three chambers, House, Senate, White House. So that's what we saw last year with HR 1. As a result of HR 1, people are losing access to food assistance, to Medicaid. We are seeing more people struggling to make ends meet. We're also seeing a lot of disinvestment from states because there's a new matching requirement for states. And so, when states have to shuffle around their budget in order to fill in the gaps left by those federal programs, inevitably there are programs that they are no longer going to be able to fund. And so one of those things that could be on the chopping block for local communities could be, local services for housing. It puts additional strain on budgets all across the board. And as a result, people are losing access to the resources that they need to afford medical care, to afford food on the table, to keep a roof over their heads. And as we're, talking to, the House is currently looking at the potential for a third reconciliation bill that would provide around $95 billion for Department of Defense, as well as a few other things, including trying again to implement some provisions of a bill called the SAVE Act, which is a voter suppression bill. Um, and I bring this up to, so one, it's not clear whether or not this third bill has the votes to pass, but $95 billion is a lot of money. And we in the affordable housing community hear often, oh, we don't have the money for that. We don't have the money to make sure everybody has an affordable home. We don't have the money to make sure that rental assistance is available to everybody. Um, it seems that they are able to find the money when they want to, when there is the political will to do so. They seem to be able to shake to find that money in the banana stand and like make it happen, right? And so I think it's important to keep in mind, like, as we go through these advocacy circles and as we talk about what our communities need, it's important to keep in mind, the idea of, well, we simply don't have the money. Make different decisions on how you're spending the money then, right? So that's my little soapbox for now. But that's another thing we're going to be paying attention to. Someone mentioned in the comments too, the criminalization of homelessness is also on the rise. Something that we've been paying attention to is HUD trying to make changes to how communities can respond to the needs of people experiencing homelessness, including by limiting communities' ability to pay for permanent supportive housing, which we know is the most effective way of ending homelessness for people. Um, the HUD is proposing changes to how it funds homelessness assistance. And those changes would put as many as 97,000 people who had previously been experiencing homelessness at risk of losing that assistance. We are also paying attention again, and like Rachel said in her question, there are a lot of rollbacks of protections and rights for people in housing. So we've seen changes to the mixed status rule, which impacts the ability of immigrant families to stay in housing. We've seen the attempt to put work requirements and term limits in place on assisted housing, rolling back the equal access rule, which impacts transgender people's access to homeless assistance. Changes to how PHAs can screen for immigration, and just a whole myriad of other really problematic proposals that have the potential to do a lot of damages to communities. And so I think I'll end with saying that what is really on the ballot in the future is ensuring that we have a Congress that can and will do more to actually stop the harm that's being done, and can and will do more to actually help communities in the ways that they need. Um, and that includes, things like you can include legislative text in laws to prohibit funds from being used for the implementation of some of these rules that I was just talking about in those law changes. Or you can codify protections for people into law, like through the Fair Futures Act. And so I will leave it at that and turn it back on over to you, Rachel. Thanks again.
Thank you, Kim. And I want to reiterate what Kim opened up with. What did you say? We have 10 weeks essentially before the end of this congressional session where your elected members will be back home in their states and in their state houses specifically. And so I want to reiterate that. Call them, email them, gather your friends together, email them together, workshop your messages, send them the pictures, attach pictures of what you're seeing in your communities. Because when they hear firsthand from the first of all, we employ them. We are their employers. And they work for us, whether you voted for them or not. And so they need to know what their constituents are seeing and feeling and hearing on the ground. And that intimate touch point can go sometimes, oftentimes, a lot farther than what a lobbyist or a national organization can convey, who they see all the time. And I hear that even here in DC and local politics when, there's local things happening here. City council really needs to hear from constituents and people that are affected by the issues, not from the same advocates that they see all of the time. So it really is a all hands on deck effort. So thank you, Kim. And then also reiterating the money is out there. The money is out there. And so as you are researching who's going to be on your ballots for the midterm elections, the things that Kim is bringing up, finding candidates who are serious about putting the money where the root causes are, that's what we should be pushing them on. And so, speaking of the Fair Futures Act, I'm going to pass to Yusuf. You know firsthand what it means to have a conviction follow you into a housing application well after you've already paid your debt to society. You went from prison to Princeton, then you built an award-winning affordable housing company, and your personal story has directly inspired the progress that the Fair Future Act has achieved so far. So, can you talk to our audience about what exactly the Fair Future Act is, why it's important, what does repealing the Third Amendment Act mean, and then what does all of that mean for the future of housing justice?
Yeah, well, I appreciate that introduction, Ray, and thankful to be here with you, Kim, Candia, and everyone else on this call. So first, I just want to clarify the progress we made on the Fair Future Act is a result of most of the people on this call, right? I mean, certainly I've advocated and shared my story, but Kim, Candia, Dream, and so many folks on this call have engaged their legislators and helped us build the broad coalition that was necessary to advance this legislation. So let me first talk about what the Thurmond Amendment is and what the Fair Future Act does and how we were able to advance this piece of legislation. And even more importantly, how do we continue to move it forward? So the Thurmond Amendment is a carve out to the Fair Housing Amendments Act of 1988 that allows landlords to summarily deny anyone for life with any type of drug selling related conviction. So if you have a possession with the intent to deliver marijuana, for the rest of your life, an algorithm, a landlord, whatever the screening process is, can immediately filter out your application without any consideration of your income, your credit score, or any market measures of risk. And obviously, that's problematic on a number of fronts, right? The Fair Future Act would restore fair housing protections for this group of individuals, over 9 million Americans, and ensure that they received an individualized assessment of their rental application like any other person applying for an apartment. And the success we have had to date can be attributed to the diverse coalition of stakeholders that we've put together to advocate for this legislation. A lot of folks don't know, but the number one conviction veterans have in our communities is a possession with the intent to deliver charge. The number one conviction survivors and victims of human trafficking have are possession with the intent to deliver charges. So we've built a broad tent and coalition of people directly impacted by this legislation, and we've put that in front of lawmakers, and we were very fortunate to have a bipartisan introduction of this legislation in the 119th Congress. We need more lawmakers to support this legislation, and I would encourage everyone on this call to learn more about the Fair Future Act and contact your congressional representative and tell them to support this important piece of legislation.
Thank you, Yusuf. I'm going to stay with you for a second, but I want to emphasize that part too. The number one conviction of veterans and victims of human trafficking is possession with intent to sell. And I think that I also saw in the chat, um, someone experienced homelessness as a vet as well. And so that's also a community that we need to make sure is at the table. And we need to make sure there's also public safety and public health implications there. So all of these issues intersect, and housing is one of the core resources to help ensure that people are safe and people are healthy. But Yusuf, for the Fair Future Act, you talked about having a diverse coalition and some of these stakeholders being involved. Everybody who's been watching any sort of political news, particularly coming out of DC on the Hill, all you see is a polarization. All you see is how red and blue is not getting along. So, what has the journey been like for you now that you have a Republican and you have Democratic sponsorship? How did you achieve that? But again, talk a little bit about what that journey was like.
Well, that's a great question. And what folks have to remember is that every elected official, with the exception of the president, is elected locally, right? So your congressperson, they might be in DC half the time, but they need the votes in their district to get to DC. And so, to your point earlier, Ray, about engaging with your legislative offices. And look, you might not get the meeting with the congressman the first time you ask, but that's actually okay. If you're meeting with a member of their office and you're going into that meeting prepared and you convey the concerns that you have and the actions you want your legislator to take, it doesn't take that many people to get on the radar of your congressperson. Trust me. And so we were very fortunate here in Pennsylvania. We are a purple district, and we're currently represented by Congressman Ryan McKenzie. And I reached out to his office and I sat down with the coalition we've built, and we said, this is a problem in our community. And I think that's an important framing for this issue. When you meet with your congressional office, you can talk about 9 million Americans, but 9 million Americans don't vote them into office. So make sure you're talking about the impact of these barriers in your communities, right? The affordability issue, the public safety issue, all of this can be tied back. And that's the message we took to our congressperson. And he co sponsored the Fair Future Act. And so we have a bipartisan bill, but we can't stop here. It's not enough to get a bipartisan bill introduced. We need to get a bipartisan bill passed. And so that's where everyone on this call can have a part to play, does have a part to play. And I'll drop some resources in the chat around the Thurman Amendment. And if anyone needs any guidance in terms of how to engage their congressional offices, let me know, let Candia know, let Kim know. But the main thing is to get involved and to have your voice heard.
I love a resource. And speaking of which, shout out to Eric, excuse me, shout out to Eric in the chat who says he has a ton of Kentucky resources on his website. As if anyone is from Kentucky, we definitely do a lot of justice work in Kentucky. Public health is public safety specifically. So if you are in that state, or honestly, even if you're not, but you may want to look at some resources that you could possibly emulate for your state and for your community, get some inspiration, please take a look at that. And then Yusuf is going to share some info as well. And then thank you, Tori. We also have our Fair Future Act petition in collaboration with Yusuf and his work that you can sign as well for on the federal level. Candia, I am coming down your aisle. You brought both 20 years of policy experience and lived experience to Dream.org, and you've seen this issue in particular from inside city government, inside Congress, and now inside leading advocacy organizations, even beyond Dream.org. So, how does Dream.org, a national organization, can you talk to the audience about how we think about housing as a public safety issue, and what does the political path forward look like for some of the reforms, including Fair Future Act?
Yeah, thank you, Ray Pay, for the question, and certainly appreciate my colleagues and their input into this very important discussion. Yeah, I think I want to take a step back because one of the things I need to make people aware of is in answering that question, it starts with recognizing the importance, as Yusuf mentioned, of constituency. But in particular, the constituencies that are directly impacted by this issue. Those voices lifting up those stories in the halls of Congress and state legislatures is critical and important, and has been really, when we take a look at any campaign, the voices of the directly impacted community has been the is at the center of it, but also is center of the success of those campaigns. And so, when we take a look at this issue, I can't answer that question without stating how important those voices are. Now, housing as a public safety issue, I also have to talk about it in the context of it being a public health issue, right? And so you mentioned our campaign, public health is public safety. Those two are inextricably linked. And what we know is that access to housing for people with criminal backgrounds is fundamental to public safety. Stable housing is one of the strongest predictors of whether someone will successfully reintegrate back into community after their incarceration. Public safety is not simply, and we always, people often talk about it as policing and incarceration, but public safety is less about policing incarceration and more about reducing the conditions that contribute to crime and increasing the conditions that promote stability. And so, Ray, what we also have seen is that research across, say, multiple disciplines consistently finds that people with stable housing are less likely to reoffend, more likely to secure employment, and quite frankly, are best situated to comply with supervised release requirements. And so, and at the end of the day, more likely to be strong contributors in community. And so when individuals leave prison or jail without stable housing in place, they face really what are immediate barriers to rebuilding their lives. Housing instability often leads to unemployment, often leads to financial insecurity, disrupted family relationships, and untreated behavioral health needs. And so, these factors increase the likelihood of, as we know, of reoffending. And so numerous studies have found that housing stability is associated with lower rates of rearrest and reincarceration. Now, you asked a question around the political path forward for the Fair Future Act. And I really think Yusuf has really set the table for a positive path forward. He has built a great deal of momentum in this campaign, certainly in partnership with Drug Policy Alliance and his strong and persistent leadership. We have built strong, committed coalitions that includes organizations that span the political divide. And I can give you the who's who of organizations that sit left of the center, the who's who of organizations that sit right of the center, are meeting on a monthly basis. And so Yusuf mentioned the bipartisan support, and I think it's important to lift up that this issue is now on the radar of the Judiciary Chairman, Jim Jordan. And so we've made great progress for a bill that has, quite frankly, was introduced in a turbulent season. We were able to cut through a lot of the noise that in this political environment, and have and given the short window we have right now, what we do see as a challenge that we're facing in this Congress is that there are a number of must-pass bills that are taking up the agenda and has gotten in the way. But we think, as much as it may be a long shot to get something done in this Congress, It's a shot worth taking, and I think our best shot is the continued persistent effort, the continued building of partnerships and alliances, and the continual building and bringing in the voices of the individuals who are right here on this call today to have conversations with their member of Congress. But I can't state and I can't understate, or shall I say, I can't overstate the important foundation that has been established through the leadership of Yusuf Dahl. And I know he was not the valedictorian of our cohort program, but if we were reevaluating that and given the fundamentals that he brought to the table in building this coalition and applying our theory of change, Yusuf has done a great job of doing just that in the building of this campaign. He's my valedictorian, by the way.
I love that.
Who paid Candia before this call? Who slipped him some money?
Dream.org paid Candy. I'm gonna come back to Candia in a minute. I do want to transition to Kim, and I want to flag Tammy's comment. So, Tammy, if you can give me the spell out the acronym of RRHA just to make sure I'm accurate. But she said, I need to know what I can do to speak with someone other than RRHA, someone that I can trust. There is a major concern here, especially with the evictions and how tenants are being charged for rent and other charges, and the fact that the condition of the units here are deplorable. So again, Tammy, if you don't mind spelling out the acronym just so that we're all aware, and then if anyone has any resources or feedback that you can give her, please do that. And then also thank you everyone else who's dropping resources in the chat. I love to see it. Kim, so housing disenfranchisement doesn't just mean losing a home for one person. For people with records, it can mean losing access to public housing for their families, losing voting rights also in some of these states, and sometimes even losing custody of children. We have some people at Dream.org that have experienced some of these things. Can you connect the dots for people who may not see public housing as a broader social issue and civil rights issue?
Yeah, absolutely. And I also want to thank Tammy in the chat for so she mentioned that she's talking about the Richmond Redevelopment Housing Authority. Um, there might be tenant unions in your area, Tammy, that could help hold that redevelopment authority accountable. Legal aid might also be able to provide some assistance, but I'm happy to try to connect you to resources too, if that would be helpful. So please feel free to reach out. But to your question, Rachel, so lawmakers should be invested in meeting the needs of their constituents, and keeping them in office or voting them out is a way of holding those elected officials accountable to meeting their constituents' needs. Yeah, I saw a question too in the Q&A. What do you do with a representative who doesn't hold town halls, who refuses to hold meetings, who won't answer emails? Uh, Vote them out. They are not doing their job. They are supposed to be responsive to you. That is their whole that is their whole job, is to be responsive to the needs of their constituents. But to your point too, communities that face the greatest barriers to securing things like stable, accessible, and affordable housing. So that includes, people with extremely low incomes, people experiencing homelessness, people who have been formally incarcerated and convicted. They also face the greatest barriers to voting. And as a result, the needs of these communities are rarely, if ever, reflected in policy decisions. And then that also, it's discouraging, and it reinforces a disinterest in the political system. Why should I bother if you are not going to be doing what I'm asking you to do, right? But in order to build the political will for needed policy changes, we also need people who were united by that shared experience, by, the experience of being incarcerated, by being somebody struggling to afford rent, by being somebody who has experienced homelessness. We need people to demonstrate their power as a significant voting bloc. Barriers to the ballot box, whether it's through voter ID laws, restricting access to mail-in voting, or removing someone's right to vote, as a collateral consequence of incarceration, those are all ways of obscuring and suppressing political power and making it and ensuring basically that this is a system that you do not see yourself reflected in, and so you do not feel like you have a place to engage in it. I try to keep in mind because I know it can be really disheartening seeing a lot of terrible things happening and then feeling like you do not have the power to make a change, or that voting is futile. And, it's easy to feel that way. And the thing that I try to keep in mind is that if voting were not important, people would not be trying to take away your right to do it. People are trying to do that because it matters. And so I just wanted to add that in too.
Thank you. And again, that's a great tie-in to the general theme of this series because we started this series talking about voting rights. All of these things are interconnected indefinitely for the rest of forever. And so as long as they continue to disenfranchise and to cause these fractures in systems across areas, it's going to be more and more and more difficult for people to have the stability that we need. And so voting is equally if not, incredibly important into enacting change in these communities. And I want to call out Cecilia's question in the chat. I am 60 years old and I'm having a hard time meeting my mortgage, taxes, and property insurance with my income. I would like to know what my options are in case I lose my home. Cecilia, if you don't mind sharing what state you are in, that may help somebody direct you to some proper resources. But if anyone else has some thoughts or feedback or support for Cecilia, please do. Illinois, okay. So yes, if anyone has resources that could help Cecilia, please do that. And Candia, I'm going to come right back to you. So we're talking about voting. Kim, you keep giving me the layup. Thank you so much. We're heading into a midterm election cycle, and Candia, you are our resident government affairs expert here at Dream. Where is housing showing up on the ballot at the state and local level? And looking into 2028, possibly on the federal level? And what should people in this audience be paying attention to beyond these local races?
Oop, had to almost forgot to take myself off mute here. Um, there's in Kim, if I sort of miss anything, please chime in. But Kim did cover the 21st Century Road to Housing Act in a thorough way and talked about the it as a start, but also the opportunities for us to provide more assistance and funding for folks. And so I think that at the federal level, that I think we should really scream to the mountaintops on that, and help Congress know that the work is not done, and in passing what was a bipartisan bill. But also we also think that a lot of work can be done at the state levels to make housing more affordable. And as you know, Ray, we engaged in a affordable housing campaign in 4 states, piloted in 4 states, which include Arizona, Wisconsin, state of New York, as well as Pennsylvania. And so we have some different initiatives within those 4 states. In Pennsylvania, certainly we are seeking to advance the Fair Future Act, and we've covered a great deal of ground. We've secured an influential Republican champion for the bill in Pennsylvania. But there's 21, I've counted 21 bills in the state of Pennsylvania that seek to address the issue of access to housing, housing supply, and affordable housing, that range everywhere from property tax abatements to parking reforms to grants to really developing accelerators for the permitting and rezoning processes, and making allowances for ADUs, or accessory dwelling units, which are, add-ons to a property in addition to the main house. In Wisconsin, again, we are Fair Future Act conversations are growing in the state of Wisconsin. We also have been seeking to uh, increase the ceiling or limits for LIHTC, low income housing tax credits. Um, but in addition, incentivize developers who are applying for the low income housing tax credits, incentivize them to set aside units for people who are formerly incarcerated. And so we're working with the executive director of Wisconsin Economic Development Authority, who has expressed interest in showing us the process by which we can incentivize developers to set aside housing for people with convictions. And in the state of New York, there's some incredible work going on there in engaging the faith community, incentivizing the faith community to build more affordable housing developments in their communities. And so there's opportunities for for engagement throughout the state in this election process to put this issue at the forefront of the agenda. Um, I think Kim, you will attest that the issue of affordability and access to housing is not a new issue. And while it's getting a lot of attention today, this is something I can tell you. While I may look like I'm 19, it's been something we've been discussing. Folks have been discussing for the better part of my entire 19 years of life. Okay, so 50 something years of life. And so this isn't a new issue, but certainly it is important that we engage it because it has resonance not only um, in urban areas, but you're seeing rural communities wrestle with the issue of affordability as well.
Well, happy 21st birthday, Candia.
Ah, I'm all those ages.
Jinx Tori in the chat. I'm gonna take a couple of Q&A questions that we pulled together, and then for the panel, I have a round robin question. Just what would you like everybody to do in the next 30 days? So think about that answer. But let's start with a couple of Q&A questions. Candia, you just mentioned Milwaukee or Wisconsin, and Tamara asked a question. And she said, there are numerous cases of Milwaukee, Wisconsin residents being forcibly removed from their housing due to not being legally protected after the death of their family member who had the mortgage. How can people who can't afford attorneys learn and exercise their rights in the aftermath of court actions? And that's for anyone on the panel to.
Yeah, I think there's probably Kim. Is that one you guys can direct folks
Yeah,
toward?
I'm happy to. I think that's the specific policy is referring to something called heirs property, I believe. But regardless, for questions like this, it's usually will be the most effective to contact a legal aid organization who will be able to provide that kind of insights on the state and local laws that might be applicable to a particular situation. And there was conversation going on too in the chat around tenant unionizing. And tenant unions can be a really great way of building that collective power with other renters to advocate for safe living conditions, to do things like withholding rent in order to get repairs done that are needed. Yeah, so legal aid is probably going to be kind of the best next step. And tenant unions might be able to provide some of that additional kind of organizing power to do long-term support and services to make sure that situations like this are not happening.
Then Kim, I know Ray Pay is asking the questions, but I do have a. Have you seen unions who who also engage in policy change and advocacy? Just curious if you've seen examples of that.
Yeah, most definitely. So a great example is Tough, the Tenant Union Federation in, I believe they're based out of, oh gosh, Missouri, I want to say. But they have been doing really, really great organizing work for the rights of tenants in their community. We also, NLIHC works with tenant unions in order to help, build their capacity and to help do education and all of those important pieces that are important to get all of to see changes being made. So yes, we love Kansas City. Yes, I saw somebody. Yeah, both sides. So thank you, Remy, for correcting me. But Kansas City. But yes, a lot of good people power in a tenant union.
Hmm. Hmm.
Thank you, Kim. Um, Remy said that in Kansas, the PAC, known as the National Association of Realtors, is hampering efforts to implement a rental registry to hold landlords accountable for maintenance neglect all over the state. Does anyone have contacts or advice for tackling that?
Remy, I would love for you to reach out. So, in addition to kind of the policy end of stuff that I work on for NLHC, we also have a field team that does some of that kind of the local or the like more state advocacy and helping to organize around that. So would love to see if there are, other groups we can help connect you to or, folks doing the similar work in your community so that we can get you all connected and working towards that goal together.
And I'm going to ask one, thank you, Kim. I'm going to ask one more question in the chat, and then I'll have Kim, Yusuf, and Candia just go around and say what you would like people, what you think people should do in the next 30 days. And so Jennifer Caldwell, who had a similar question as Belinda, Jennifer says, we are in Mississippi having health issues, not able to work. My daughter is trying her best, but it's just not enough. We can't get help because we make too much money with just her working, her daughter. So how do we get some kind of cap on rent? Are there any tactics? Are there any examples in other states that they could, research? Any resources that anybody has?
So I'm fiercely Googling right now. We also have a state and local research team that looks at laws like rent caps oh gosh, sorry, my brain is fried at this point in the night. That looks at laws like rent caps, like right to counsel and other policies that we know help tenants stay in their homes that, help ensure that people can afford rent. So what I'm furiously Googling is the report that I know we put together recently on just this question. So let's see if I can dig it up before the call ends.
Thank you, Kim. We're gonna give Kim a break. And Michelle, I think that you have a good closing out statement, and then if my panelists can come off camera to get ready to answer the last round, the roundabout question, what should people be doing in the next 30 days? Michelle says, I feel that each individual prisoner needs a safe, decent place to live before they're released from prison. Also, free healthcare, job training, readiness for employment, a list of doctors and referrals, free grants for college, driver's training, food vouchers for groceries, applying for Medicaid, programs and resources for emergency services, and also a voucher for clothes. And Michelle, I would say I second, third, fourth, fifth that. I think that it's possible. I don't think that that's a pie in the sky idea. And at dream.org, we are working across sectors, across the aisle, across the country to try to push policies that can make these types of resources and programs happen. And so, Michelle, if you are not connected to the Dream network, my apologies. If you are already a member, please, please, please reach out to us, get connected with us, and see how we may be able to support each other. And that goes for everybody else that is in the chat as well. And like I said, we'll be having some follow-up resources shared in a follow-up email after this conversation tonight. So, with that being said, Yusuf, I will kick it to you first. What should people do in the next 30 days?
I would ask everyone on this call in the next 30 days to reach out to your congressional offices. and you'll get a meeting. Someone's going to meet with you. And, you know, Candia brought up a litany of bills. What did you say? 21 bills in Pennsylvania alone that have to do with housing. Congressional offices are, they don't know everything. And so oftentimes, if you can go to your congressional office well informed and you can explain an issue to those offices, it's actually helpful for them because they don't necessarily know everything that's going on. So I would encourage everyone, set up a meeting with your congressional office. You'll probably meet with a staffer, but that's okay, and articulate your concerns to that office about what you want to see done in DC, or maybe it's a local representative and what you want to see done in your own state. But nothing can get done unless you are engaging with these offices. Maybe they work with you, maybe they don't. But that is something everyone has to do. So I would encourage them to do it. Reach out to Dream if you need any guidance on how to have that conversation. And if you're interested in learning more about the Fair Future Act and want to have that conversation with your office, feel free to reach out to me, and I can help you with that conversation. But thank you all for showing up. Thank you for caring, and thank you for all the work that you do.
And thank you to Yusuf. And I promise you guys we'll share contact information. Sometimes people are like, reach out to me, and it's like, but how? We'll make sure we get y'all the information that you need. And Candia, you're up next, sir. What should people do in the next 30 days?
Thank you, Ray Pay, and really thank you for this conversation. Your facilitation, masterful. Um, a constituent, or should I say, a participant, talked about some of the resources that need to be made available as people are returning home. I think it's important to note there is an opportunity to get involved in a campaign that we're engaging with respect to the Reentry Act, which 30 days to the door, if you would, a person would apply for and receive Medicaid benefits prior to coming back into community, but also the Restore Act, which is another bill that restores SNAP benefits to people with drug convictions. Now, directly to your question, so often we attend events like this, we attend conferences, and we receive a great deal of information whereby we walk out of those events and conferences smarter than when we walked in. We also are inspired in that moment. And in that moment, we say, we're going to leave out of here and we're going to do something. And then we go home. And the further and further away we get from that conference and not do anything, the less likely it is for us to do anything. And we find ways to explain it away. And many people will understand why you decided not to engage, right? But what I'm going to suggest to you that you do tomorrow is engage. Take the spirit or energy that you have today and put it to work. I ask that you not waste the energy that you have today in this moment. Don't let that bypass you, but rather put it to work, put it to good use to advance the issues that you care about. Channel your inner Yusuf. Meet your legislator where they are. If they're having a fundraiser in your community, show up at that fundraiser. If there is a town hall that's happening in your community during the recess, show up at that town hall. If there's a forum, show up at that forum. If you know where they attend church, don't be afraid to wait for them outside the church. And so get involved, but utilize the energy that has come upon you today to act immediately and with urgency.
Thank you, sir. And last but certainly not least, Miss Kim Johnson.
I don't think I have anything new to say, other than, call your representative, even if you don't like your representative. Even if like none of the kind of topics we talked about today resonated with you, call your elected officials and tell them about what you need. Call them time and again and let them know this is what we are experiencing and this is what we need help with. Half of my job is being annoying, and just showing up even though somebody doesn't want to see me. And so that's kind of half of the game is just showing up anyway. So make that ask, tell them what's going on, tell them what you need from them.
Thank you, Kim. Thank you, Candia. Also, thank you to our tech team behind the scenes. Thank you, Tori. Thank you, Harrison. Thank you, Jess. And thank you, everybody, for participating. Again, August 4th, we will be back talking about AI democracy and what's at stake on that ballot. We got a lot of things to talk about there. But we will be following up with some resources for tonight, with some contact information for the panelists tonight. And we hope to be in touch with all of you soon. Thank you and have a great evening.